Hey, how's it going, do-it-yourselfers? Hope you're ready for this. Today, I'm going to show you how you can do a four-wheel toe adjustment at home on your car. Now, if you haven't done any repairs to your suspension or steering components and you don't know their condition before you adjust your alignment, you obviously want to jack up your car and check for play in both directions. Make sure there's no problems with the steering components, any of the ball joints, control arm bushings, your struts, your shocks, all that stuff. That's very important because, if there's a problem with them, there's no point in making an alignment adjustment. You should also check and make sure you have enough air in your tires, your wheels aren't damaged and warped out of shape. Same for your tires as well. All right, next, with the car in the air, you should do a couple of things to make your life easier for adjusting your toe and tie rods later. You want to come inside and loosen this jam nut right behind your outer tie rod. Now, given that I just installed this outer tie rod and this is on there loosely, so it's not going to take me much effort to loosen this up, and I'm going to loosen a few turns so there's space in there for adjustments later. You also want to loosen or remove the clamp that's on the inner tie rod and on this dust boot, because as you turn this later on, you don't want this dust boot to twist on itself and get damaged. And then also get your wrench on the inner tie rod end and make sure it can twist freely. All right, same thing on the other side. Now, one thing to note here is that if this jam nut is really tight on your car, hold this outer tie rod in place with maybe even a pipe wrench while you twist this off, so that way you're not putting much pressure on the joint. All right, now the way the rear is adjusted on this car is not by tie rods, but rather this eccentric bolt that runs through this arm that connects to the rear of the knuckle on the rear wheels. As that goes out, that adjusts the toes in. As this goes in, adjust the toe out. Now in the rear, I'm not going to loosen this nut because I'm hoping it's in the rear, the toe adjustment is within spec. All the tires look good, all the suspension components look fine as well. So, we're not going to loosen that. Plus, access to this is easier just in case we do need to make adjustments. All right, next you want to get the car off the jack stands or the lift in our case and on the ground, because obviously in order for the adjustments to be precise or accurate, the weight of the car needs to be on the wheels. Next, with the steering wheel straight, you want to roll the car back a few feet to get all the tension out of the suspension and steering components. All right, next you want to grab some plastic bags. I have these heavy-duty contractor plastic bags, and you want to place them in front of the tires or the wheels that you're going to be doing the adjustments on. We might be doing adjustments on 4 wheels, so we're going to place them in front of both the front and the rear, but if you're only going to be adjusting the front, you can only place them in the front wheels. And then you guessed it, we roll our car onto our trash bags. Now this is obviously to allow for the tires to turn easier as we're making our adjustments, but if you don't have trash bags, you got some sheet metal, you can put 2 on 2 on top of each other with some grease in the middle, and that will allow for the tires to turn easier as well. And the next step that I almost forgot is that you want to get in the car once more, turn the steering wheel back and forth a little bit, a few times, and then straighten it out as best as you can. All right, so here's what you'll need for this DIY alignment setup. You'll need 4 jack stands. 4 matching jack stands would be great, but 2 sets of matching jack stands will do as well. 2 metal pipes, a foot or 2 longer than the track width of your car. For those of you that don't know, the track width of your car, let's say the rear track width, would be from the center of your left rear wheel to the center of your right rear wheel. Now, same thing for the front track width as well, but the idea is that these pipes are a bit longer and come just to the outside of the tire on both sides. And usually, a 7-foot long pipe would do the job. Next, you'll need some string, a tape measure, or better yet, a digital measuring caliper like this. All right, so before we go any further, I think I should explain to you what I'm going to be doing. Basically, I'm going to be making a perfect rectangle around the car. Perfect rectangle as in, 4 90-degree corners. And also, I'm going to be squaring the car inside of the rectangle exactly. It doesn't have to be exactly the same distance from the top, on the top and the bottom, but it has to be perfectly squared inside of the rectangle from side to side, because we're going to be using the strings that will be going on the sides of the rectangle to do our adjusting for the toe. All right, so I think I can show it to you better on this. So let's say you have a perfectly squared rectangle. In order to have that, you need to make sure these are the same exact length. We're going to make sure that's the case with the strings, and these are the same. We're going to make sure that's the case with the pipes. Now, you could have a perfectly square rectangle, but if the car, let's say this phone, we're going to represent the car, inside the rectangle is not squared, then these distances are going to be way off. You need to make sure that the car is exactly squared inside the rectangle at least side to side. It doesn't matter top to bottom, but side to side, it has to be perfectly squared. Now, in order to do that, we're going to pick 1 point on each side, one matching point on each side, and the best point is going to be the center of your rear wheels. You're going to pick those and make sure these distances match on the side, because if they match, this cannot possibly be crooked, because if it's crooked, the distances are not going to match. So make sure if those match, then your car is squared side to side inside the rectangle. And to try to preemptively answer some of your suggestions and questions, no, you can't go with both wheels and try to make sure they're matched, because the track width could be different. You could have a different track width up front than the rear, and if you try to go 2 inches from the center of the wheel to the string on the front and in the rear, that's not going to be exactly parallel on the side. It's going to be either pointed in or pointed out. So you got to pick 1 point. It's usually going to be best to use the rear wheels. Also, it's not going to matter that your rear wheels are towed in or out, whatever degrees they are, because we're going to be using the pointy end of this digital caliper. We're going to put that exactly at the center of this hub. And whether this is towed in or out, if we go perfectly square to the string, it's not going to matter much, because, let's imagine this is my hand. Let's say if this is towed in, it's not going to push this back and forth. It's just the edges that go in and out. All right, next we're going to set the line just on the outside of the car. And for that, we're going to use some string and jack stands. If you're like me, have 2 separate sets of jack stands, use 1 from each set. So on this side, you can see, I have this jack stand set. I have attached the string to it. I've also started it against this joint in the concrete. And I've also marked the front and the side of this jack stand with a pin on my epoxy flooring that I should be able to easily clean off later. And then I've extended that to the other jack stand on this end. And I've done pretty much the same thing. I've tied it to that jack stand. I also marked it on the bottom, so that way the next set can go right there and it would be exactly the same distance. And the distance you want to set is just a little bit more than the length of your car. This is about 15.5 feet long, so I've set it to about 17 feet long. Also, you want these jack stands in this position this way, because the pipe will go in front of the car resting on top of the jack stands, and that goes for both sets. All right, next we'll move our set of jack stands to a little bit behind the car, and of course a little bit to the front of the car. All right, next it's time to set our distance from the center of the hub to the string, and I've decided to go with 1 inch. And as you can see, we got about 0.59 inches, so we're going to move it back a little bit. All right, so as you can see, we got 0.98. That's pretty close. We're going to have to do adjusting later anyway, so we're just going to get it really close right now. Also goes without saying, if you can help it, remove the center cap. Now, I didn't do it on this because I forgot when the wheel was off the car, but this center cap is pretty, nice and tight in place, so it shouldn't be a problem. All right, so next we'll do the passenger side. Got the jack stands with the strings on this side, but one thing that's going to aid you to square this is to, approximately get it as close as you can, same distance from the back of the car to the other jack stand. Grab one of these pipes, you put it on here now, and then you try to square the back end of it with the top of the jack stand. If it's really crooked, then you're not going to be able to square this at this end. Right now, the way this is sitting, here, let me show you guys. So yeah, if you were to look at where the pipe is resting on top of the jack stands, and if you can tell by the way it looks, but if you were to put a straight edge, you can tell that this end is further in a little bit than this end. That means if this were to straighten it out, you probably need to move that up just a little bit to straighten this out and have this flush on both sides. But of course, that's not 100%. That doesn't mean if you flush it out, doesn't mean you have necessarily 100% 90 degrees angle there, but it's a good starting point. All right, next we'll take our measurement back here. As you can see, I have 1 inch. Again, that's close enough to 0.98 inches. And again, these are going to move slightly as we go along. All right, so next it's time to measure the pipes. Make sure they're the same exact distance. Again, on this side, you want to make it plumb with the jack stand. On this side, I've marked it to pretty close to where it is at 65 inches exactly. But next, I'm going to use this transparent ruler to measure it more precisely the rest of the way. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I'm measuring 3 inches and 11/16 to the edge of this jack stand here. Add that to the 65 inches that we measured earlier. That's 68 inches and 11/16. All right, and now we're gonna measure the pipe on the front. So in the rear, we had 68 inches and 11/16. And in the front, I don't think you guys can see this, but we have 70 inches and 15/16. All right, so again, our measurement for the back was 68 inches, 11/16. Up front is 70 inches, 15/16. Their difference is 2 inches and a quarter. Now, if you were to split that in two, that would be 1 inch and 1/8. And if you were to shorten this one 1 inch and 1/8, and long, extend that one 1 inch and 1/8, that would even them out. But if you were to do it on this side, that would change our distance in the back that we had set to 1 inch from the hub. So what we're going to do is actually split that one more time, the 1 inch and 1/8, in two, which would be 9/16, and go shorter 9/16 here, shorter 9/16 there, longer 9/16 in the back right side, and longer 9/16 in the back left side as well. All right, so after moving things around for about 10 minutes, I think we've got it. So here's the front. If this camera focuses, hopefully you guys can see, we got about 69 inches and 15/16. And here's a look at the rear. And in the rear, we have, again, as well, 69 inches and about 15/16. I've also double checked the distance on the string side to make sure it's a match on both sides. So next, if the distance between the center cap and the string is the same, we should be good. All right, so as you can hopefully see, we're barely touching the string, and this is on the left driver's side, we get 1.37 inches. And we'll bring the same thing to the passenger side. As you can see, we're barely touching the string at 1.37 inches. We're gonna call this good. All right, so we're gonna take our measurements and we're gonna start in the rear. As far as the specs on this car, for the rear, it calls for positive 1/32 toe in, plus or minus about 1/32. So that means that they want 0 to about 1/16 total toe in. Now, if you were to go with 1/32, that would be actually 1/64 toe in on each side. And in decimals, that would be 0.013 inches of toe in on each side, which is not a whole lot. They basically want neutral to just very, very slightly amount of toe in. All right, so let's start with the rear of the left rear wheel. We got 1.46, and then we'll do the front of the wheel. We have 1.48, 1.49 actually, in the front of the wheel. All right, so in the left rear wheel, we have 0.03 inches of positive toe in. Now the spec called for 0.013 inches of positive toe in on each side, plus or minus 0.013. So the high end of that spec would be 0.026. So we're out of spec according to our measurements, 0.004 inches of positive toe in. We're gonna call this good. All right, next time for the right rear wheel. And again, we're gonna start with the rear of the wheel. And we have 1.49. Then onto the front of the wheel. And here we have 1.51. All right, so for the rear, we have 0.02 inches of positive toe. Again, the high end of this allowable spec for this is 0.026, so well within spec. So now we're gonna move to the front, the fun one. So we'll start with the driver's side front wheel. In the rear of it, we have 1.54, 1.55. And up front, let's see what we got up front. We have 1.30. We have 1.30. We are way, way toed out. So yeah, again, we have 1.54 here, which means greater distance here. 1.30 was it here, which means less distance here. So we're toed out 0.24 inches. Or in other words, we're toed out about 1/4 of an inch. The spec for the front on these is neutral toe. So we want to get it to 0 as possible. But again, better to go, if you can't get it exactly 0, better to go a little bit positive or toe in than negative. All right, now before we go in there and give it the old reach around with our wrench, we're gonna move some stuff out of the way. So yeah, another good thing about this setup is that after you set everything up and everything is squared, you can simply grab these pipes and move them out of the way. Now the other thing you should do is to mark the location of the jack stands that are holding up the strings by a magic marker in the front, in the rear, and the sides, just in case you bump into them or while trying to reach in there, as I'm about to do, you move the string and whatnot. All right, so let's see if we can do this. And we're gonna unscrew this since the tie rod is behind the wheel. So we wanna unscrew it and extend this part out for more toe in. So that would be counterclockwise. So there, I think I got about a half a turn in there. Let's do our measurement again. On the rear, we have about 1.49 now. We have 1.4443. So a little bit more to go. So we'll go with another 1/4 of a turn. All right, folks, I think we've got it. So here's the back. We have 1.45. And here in the front, we have 1.46. All right, so left front, we got 0.01 inches of positive toe. Again, Honda wants 0 toe up front, but this is not exactly laser aligning, so we're gonna err on the side of caution. We're gonna give it that 0.01 inches of positive toe. It's a little bit less than 1/64, if I'm not mistaken. But next, we're gonna tie in that jam nut that's at our tie rod end, and this is where it becomes very important that you check first to make sure the jam nut can move freely on the inner tie rod, because if not, it's going to twist that inner tie rod and throw off your alignment. All right, so again, this is the right front wheel. The rear of it, we have 1.37 in the rear of it. And then up front, let's see what we have here. We got 1.27. All right, so here we're also towed out, but not as much as the other side. Here we're towed out 0.1 inches, which is just shy of 1/8 of an inch, if I'm not mistaken. So we're going to do the same thing, get underneath, unscrew our tie rod. All right, folks, I think we got it on this side as well. As you can see over here, we got 1.31. Back here, we have 1.30, giving us a toe end of 0.01 inches, which is just about right. All right, next, you want to tighten that jam nut, put on the clamps for the dust boots on the inner tie rod, but there's a couple things that I want to mention. One thing is that this setup can be greatly improved upon if we were to replace these strings with something solid, like a piece of metal pipe, or maybe a square tubing. Yeah, especially if you could find a piece of square tubing long enough for the sides, which I'm sure they're out there. It would have to be 18 feet, 19 feet long. And then the front as well. And in the future, I'm gonna actually do this and make a rig where there are pre-drilled holes in the square tubing, both for the front and the rear, where they're exactly 90 degrees. You can take them apart and set them up against any car to do this alignment. That way you're sure that you have 90 degrees in 4 corners. All you have to do is to set it up around the car, and then you just line it up at the hubs in the rear, and you should be good to go. It shouldn't take long at all. Because this way with the strings, that string, you can pull one side 1 inch before the other side starts to tip over, and you have no real way of measuring the tightness of the rope. So there's a variable there. Now, another way to do this, which is the setup I have here, is the way they do it on the side of the racetrack, which is to set up a rig that attaches to the frame or the chassis of the car in the front. Same in the back. This would be obviously beneficial if you're working on the same car, you're trying to modify it maybe for a racetrack and whatnot. You can make up a rig that attaches to the same exact locations every time, up front and in the rear. And then in front of the rig, you would have a piece of metal that's somewhat adjustable, and you can mark the locations both in the front and the rear. Every time you need to check your alignment, you just throw that on there, and then you can check your alignment, at least the toe alignment that is, and that would make life easy for you. But if you're like me and you're going to be working on a variety of cars, then the rig I just talked about is probably your best bet. It's easy to set up, and you can check and adjust toe on pretty much any car as long as it fits within that rectangle that you'll be making. But now there are other ways to check and adjust toe. And then one other good way is to go by the track width of front and the rear. You set up a string on the sides, and then you take into consideration if there is a difference in the track width, and you add it to whatever side it is, and then you check the toe. But in my opinion, that's not as accurate as doing this, because that's assuming the track width from the factory not only was accurate to begin with, but is still accurate after, in our case, nearly 30 years. But if you want to see that, I'm open to making a video on that and checking whether that's accurate or not. Or if you want to see other videos, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell notification, give this video a thumbs up, check out my other videos on this side of the screen, suggestion box, description box as well. All right, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.